Welcome everyone to Pontos Fathom Press, and thanks for joining our Pontos Fathom podcast, episode 8, the first in a month-long series of podcasts on the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, and we are going to go deep into the connections of Dick, not only referencing his own writing and how the exegesis texts in the event shaped his thinking, how it relates to other philosophical and psychological things that we think are interesting, but also the impact that it has in the sense of a writer's notebooks. A friend of mine called the exegesis of Philip K. Dick Chernobyl for a white dude, and I think it's impossible to summarize what this book is, but we will approach it from the point of view of conversations. Would appreciate your guys' comments below as we do these. And as you know, we're joining this, we're growing this channel not only as an extension of Pontos Fathom Press and our book publishing, but also just to have a place where we could share ideas, talk about the books that inspired us and our authors and inspire you, and get that conversation going. While we're talking about the madness of Philip K. Dick, just want to talk about the madness of Benzimagos. This is Flowing the Tears of a Flesh Android, the curiously short occupancy of Obiden. It is in severely redacted form from government regulation, but it is a fantastic look and homage in some ways to writers like Dick or William S. Burroughs, into the salinity levels of the first flesh android in chief, and how the tentacle viability has been kept sufficiently salienated through the flowing of his tears by his COG operative, Dr. Rona Crown, who just descended from the COG low orbital satellite, keeps the candidate viable for that curiously short occupancy. So if you guys would like to support the channel, love you to pick up a copy of the Benzimagos book. Links are below in the description. So let's kind of talk about the exegesis of Philip K. Dick. Let's kind of frame it. This Jonathan Lethem, Pamela Jackson edition of this book is fantastic. There's even more stuff than this, but maybe we'll just frame it for you quickly with the quote from Foucault in his History of Madness. He just has this quote where he says, "Madness, the absence of an oeuvre," right? So we want to talk a little bit about that in the first round, but I just want to frame things for us in the sense of, hey, there's always been these great writers who have had some kind of mad urge to write. I mean, if you look at this Lacan's odd synthome lectures, which are really about that same Foucault quote, except in the case of Joyce, right? So you look at Joyce's writings, his Ulysses, his Finnegan's Wake, as a literary coming of age of humanity in a way, into the idea of the places and spaces of consciousness and its relation to text. And I think that that's a great place to sort of kick off the framing of Philip K. Dick's exegesis, because not only is it kind of a life's work or a life's notebook, not only is it behind lots of his other novels. I mean, you see elements of it in Valis, you see elements of it in emerging in places like Ubik even. But a lot of it is the Shakespearean notion of the world is not what it seems, but then sort of fused together with, let's say, political activism almost, where the idea of is it satisfactory for us living in a sort of fallen world, or even living in a Gnostic world? What's our position in a Gnostic world, right? And finally, what's our relationship to the sort of the sci-fi aspect of Dick, which is, there is a progress happening or seemingly progress happening. You know, science fiction has always been a hopeful projection into the future of mankind, right? So you have this Dick as the science fiction author who's prophesying in some ways the future through technological means. And then you have Dick, this sort of political social commentator who's sort of looking at the Black Iron Prison, which comes out of this too, looking at the idea of there's always something a bit dystopian about everything. And in the middle of that, you've got this event that happens for Philip K. Dick, and this cover that the designers of this book put together is just fantastic. It's somewhat of the infinity symbol, but it's also somewhat of the Christian ichthys figure, the Christian fish. So quickly, for the people who don't know, the idea of Dick's exegesis was, there's a quote here, what can I do? What best can I do? Exactly what I've done. My voice for the voiceless. Right? And so this defies summary, but then again, I will kind of try to summarize. There was an event that happened, a series of events that happened to Dick. Some of its memory, some of its dream, some of its experience, right? One of the key moments around this exegesis writing, the triggering of this exegesis notebook writing, is, and guys, if I get it wrong, just kind of can comment in the comments, but the way I understand it is Dick had some tooth surgery, oral surgery done, and he was waiting for some medicine to come from the pharmacy, some painkillers, so you can imagine he was in pain. He was waiting for the drugs to come to deal with that from his prescription. The delivery comes to the house. So I don't know if you guys know that you're in that post-Novocaine state, you're in that post-surgery state, everything's kind of off. There's a bit of a pain high, almost, let's say. Plus, knowing Dick's character as being somewhat anxiety-ridden, somewhat schizophrenic even. Not sure what his real diagnoses were, just saying something from my point of view of how he seems to fuel his creativity, let's call it. And the doorbell rings, a package of these painkillers arrives, and the delivery person, the woman, was wearing that Christian symbol, this Christian symbol as a necklace, right? So that ichthys, Christ the fisher of men sort of thing. And the way Dick describes it, and I'm paraphrasing here quickly, is the sunlight shines off of this pendant that the delivery woman is wearing, and a pinkish, purplish, color out of space even beam of light shines into Dick's eyes, right? And from that he gets the sensation of information being downloaded. Now you got to remember, this is 1974. There's no internet. There's no concept of downloading. I mean, maybe the closest thing that this kind of equates to in the zeitgeist of the time would be the light montage of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? So there was this is a time before there's internet. This is, people used to read newspapers, had the phone connected to the wall, you know, put coins in the door to get out. No, just kidding. And so Dick has this sensation that there's a stream of logic, maybe like, as Patti Smith would say, cold streams of logic. We're just beaming through this pink ray off the Christian symbol, downloading information into Dick's mind. And he kind of felt like he had been downloaded. Something had downloaded in a way from him. This is how I remember the story. And then from then on, everything changed, and he started to have the experiences that this book starts to explore. I mean, so some of those experiences were very informed by Christianity, and Gnostic Christianity for sure. So a lot of those themes of Gnostic Christianity came through. For example, as if you know from Christian mysticism, There's a sort of circular time notion, the idea that Christ coming down to earth in a Gnostic way. If you look at the book of John, it's like the Logos is above the world, and the descending of the Logos into the world, the Gnostic descent. We see this in Gnostic texts like the Poimanges about like how the universe was a higher form, and then the universe we live in was a lower form, and a downloading of that is what happened when Christ came to earth. So this idea of the Logos descending down into the earth was what Dick started experiencing. But more so than that, if you look into some syncretism of the time, you look at some of the Essenes, Dick started to be very interested in all of these factors. Even existentialism, which was big in the 20th century, right? Existentialism is kind of like a modern day Gnosticism. It's a bit of a doubting of the world. It's a bit of an embracing the anxiety of the world. And so Dick started to explore and have visions. And some of the visions were very strange. He had one experience where he had written about a diagnosis of his child before the child had gotten sick, and then forgotten about it, I think is how the story goes. Guys, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but he forgot about the diagnosis or this writing he had done, like an automatic writing almost. And then later on, when his child was sick, the doctors didn't know what the sickness was. And the doctors were like, we don't know what this diagnosis is. And then Dick had this strange realization that's like, wait a minute, I think I wrote about this. So he goes through his text, and he goes and finds this writing. And he's got a diagnosis that he shows to the doctors. Now, he had written this, I don't know if it was years before or months before, but before this was put, the time out of jointness of this, right, is that he writes something, the sickness happens, he forgets about it, rediscovers this writing, brings that diagnosis to the doctor, and that doctor is informed by Dick's mad writings, and that is the proper diagnosis of his child. And this is just mind-blowing for Dick. So Dick starts to have this kind of listen, there's more than one. There's so many different experiences that Dick starts to assimilate and explore. Some of them are about history. So, for example, he has this idea that history is not what it seems to be. So he gets onto this idea that perhaps history, we're still living in Roman times. And as you know, in Valis, there's a recurring refrain in Valis where the main characters of that book, which is Horse Lover Fats, which is a name for Philip K. Dick, he keeps saying the empire never ended, right? So and there's a cadence that kind of comes up with this chanting of that, where he starts to perceive iron bars, and he starts to hear that tone about Roman history is happening sort of in parallel layers, sort of as they said in cross channel in the. So anyway, yeah, so he starts to have this idea that we're still living in Roman times, that reality is kind of holographic or simulated, as you see from this famous speech he gave, and that we're actually still living out the Christ event. So there's a sort of Christian motif of it, there's a Gnostic motif to it, and it leads Dick deeper into that research in one way of, hey, well, maybe the Gnostics were right. Maybe the world is a... And for you guys that aren't familiar with the Gnosticism side of this, so the Gnostics were a group during the origins of Christianity. And they had so there were lots of different schools of Christianity during the dawn of Christianity. And they were competing with each other. And then it wasn't until a couple hundred years into Christianity did the one that formed history take place, and that's the one that went on to be the Middle Ages Christianity and the one that survived to today. That's sort of a strain of Christianity. But and this isn't really taught. I don't know if this is taught today, guys. Leave me a comment if people are learning stuff like this. I mean, I had some great classics classes. Went to BU, not particularly. I'm saying like a liberal enough school, but I think this is long ago enough that maybe these things aren't taught, and I think they should be really taught. It's really important for people to get a framework on these large historical movements like Christianity. I was talking to a friend of mine who was teaching philosophy, and he said that, you know, when you go through these scholastic philosophers, a lot of the students have a hard time when God is mentioned, because we're sort of living largely in a secular age, and yet these systems are still very important to study. And he tries to posit it as, well, just think of God as like the source code of something. He tries to put it in a way that not like offend people's modern sensibilities, because the underlying thought systems, or the dead thought systems, are very important to study. And I think Dick sort of has this experience, which is a revelatory experience. It's almost like a, maybe psychologically it's like a hysteria, or sort of some kind of diagnosable event. But in the context of even, Foucault's History of Madness I brought up before, the village madman used to be someone who was an oracle, someone who had a vision, right? And I think this is Dick sort of wrestling with, I am the voice. I am hearing that voice. Even in the biblical writing, we had the Acts of the Apostles. They had speaking in tongues, and this book is a speaking in tongues. But back to the Atman, right? Piercing through the Maya, right? So the idea here is, in Gnosticism, the idea was the world was not created by a kind God. In fact, the world was created by a mad God. And so the one Gnostic Sophia tradition, as many of you will know, if you're clicking on this, you may know. If you don't know, I'll kind of summarize it as best as I can. The Gnostic idea was there was this arching hierarchy of luminous beings, these deities, these, like the Logos that we have in the book of John, this pre-matter entities, let's call it. And those entities were in a disciplinic almost chain from Logos down, and the different Gnostic systems from early Christianity time tried to map these out. So you have reason comes first, or even like the Greek mythology, like night, chaos was first, and then had sky and ocean, and this. So they had a similar kind of different schools of Gnosticism would explore the origins of the universe, let's call it, right? But when it came down to Sophia, she had a moment where she wanted to create something for herself, right? So she wanted to create something of her own. And she created something, but there was some complications in his creation, and there was some anxiety, and there was some fear. And because these are like deities, the child of Sophia was born with anxiety and was born with fear. And that was instilled in all of the matter of the world. And then the kind of the big reveal, big cliffhanger at the end of the season episode of Gnosticism is sort of like we find out that the biblical Yahweh is actually insane, an insane God. And it's very Lovecraftian in a way, a mad God with a broken world. And as a result, Gnosticism really focused on, in some Christian Gnosticism, it focused on how Christ's descending into the world just was a connection, a telephone back to cord, if you would, back to the Logos, back to the heavenly Logos, bypassing the mad demiurge that controlled the world. And then the Gnostics would sort of use this in different schools. Some of them abstained from sex. Other of them were more hedonistic. There were different schools of these Gnostic sense, but all of them had this kind of similar thoughts where they would look at the world as a fallen place, and that the truth, was outside of the world, past these archons who are sort of over us, causing our suffering, misery in some ways. And so what Dick sort of started to become obsessed with was time is wrong. Maybe the whole Middle Ages, all of history, are just an illusion. It's just a vision, you know. So in that Gnostic sense, Dick really is wrestling in the exegesis with that kind of level of historical place. Things are not as they are. How could it be that I had these experiences? If I felt like information was downloaded, if I felt like some of these, I'm piercing through the veil, through using drugs, using my own schizophrenic thinking, using my own writing, are all methods to break down the illusion, right? And this is like in Vedic literature, there's lots of this too. The idea of Maya, right? The idea of Maya is the world is an illusory place. And we see this, you know, even in, maybe I'll go next to Schreber. You know, in Schreber's memoirs of my nervous illness, Daniel Paul Schreber was a judge, and he started having visions. He started having visions of God talking to him, God wanting him to be a woman. God would send rays of light into him, and he was going to be impregnated with some kind of knowledge, some understanding of the universe. Everything was rays for him, for Schreber. He had this whole cycle, and then he became not incarcerated, but he became institutionalized, and he wrote these memoirs, and eventually he had to sort of come to grips with the nerves of God and all of these visions he had, and then the reality of, well, you know, we're, as you know, the Gnostics kind of put it, or Dick would put it, we're kind of in these meat sacks, right? We're soul trapped in the light, and a lot of this inspiration is what fueled Dick to write his exegesis. You know, and for Schreber, for this book to be called a memoir of his nervous illness, it starts out almost like a Dickian novel. Like it starts almost like Dick's exegesis. It starts out like a Gnostic text, God talking to someone. It's madness. But if we look at it as a notebook and look at it as text and separate it from psychology for a bit, we start to see that what is the source of all this inspiration, right? What is the source of this divine inspiration? And like, again, that goes back to the Foucault. The idea is, in the past, there was a village madman, there was a village prophet. There's shamanic traditions, even to this day, where people who are touched or people who have some vision. And I'm sure everybody watching this can at least point to an experience they've had personally, or experience someone else had, in which something strange happened, right? This is why we love strange stories, right? And this is why Dick's writing is so great. But something strange happened that defied the logic of the structure of business as usual world, okay? And this is kind of like a place where we can kind of jump into, let's just talk about it as society and its discontents, okay? So Foucault says, where there's no work, there's no madness where there was work. And this is sort of like Dick's proving ground for so many of his novels. It's a place where he starts to look at these weird breakdown of the universe. Like, look at this list here. There's a list here. Illusion, real, sleep, wake, mechanical, purposeful, blind, sentient, formless, beautiful, rule, exception. Just making lists here. He starts getting into Eastern thought. He talks about Babylon, Gnostic acts, the nature of God, UFOs, Christ, and then he even looks at his own writing, where he sort of looks at, you know, like this idea in Ubik of being alive but being dead, right? So in Ubik, they're in cold pack, right? And they're finding reality is breaking away chapter by chapter. The money has different faces on it. The cars are regressing to old model. Things aren't working correctly. The more you're awake to what Ubik's world is, the more it slips away from you. And this is what Dick was wrestling with. And I think he found that there was some kind of break point back to Roman times, back to the Christian event. And for him, this is where he sort of just kept digging and kept digging. But I want to take a pause here because we brought in Schreber and maybe just bring up, there is the Ethics of Psychoanalysis by Lacan. But that also focuses on this work, Civilization and its Discontents, right? So you have Sigmund Freud talking about civilization and its discontents. And this is there's a little fascinating gem for those of you who don't know the work. If you don't know it, please read it. Civilization and its Discontents. I'll summarize a concept from it that I always, a nugget from this, Civilization and its Discontents. The nugget is this. We were once without civilization, right? If we believe how history formed, humans rose from hunter-gatherers to settled agriculture, and then we built farms, and those farms kind of freed up resources to build cities, and we got books, and we started learning things and studying things, and civilization was born, right? The dawn of civilization, settled agriculture, they call it to us, right? So, and at the same time, all of the old world fears, this is Freud paraphrasing Freud here, all of the old world fears, or all of our past human fears, were slowly dismantled. We used to be afraid of the rain, we built roofs. We used to be afraid of being hungry. Not only did we have crops, but we learned how to process our food, to have food through the rainy season, the dry season, the cold season. We figured it out, right? So we had plenty, we had food reserves, we had roofs over our heads. We were afraid of the hordes, we made laws, we made standing armies, right? We were afraid of death, we made religion. We gave ourselves all of these things. And this is the beauty of civilization, right? And yet, Freud says, every one of our, so sort of in a way, every one of our anxieties, whether it was being hunted by animals, fear of the elements, fear of death, fear of hunger, right? All of these things were solved by civilization. And yet, Freud says, and yet, the big and yet, why is it that civilization produces so much anxiety as a side effect? Right? So you would think, hey, before we were being chased by tigers, we were having to go hungry, we were dying of diseases, right? We've stopped all those things. But why does the idea of getting on nobody does it anymore, right? But getting on the crowded subway, right? You're lying in bed and you have to get up. I remember I was a bike messenger in Boston years and years ago. And I remember having that anxiety where it's a winter's day, it's freezing rain out, right? It's a winter's day, it's freezing rain. And I had to go out to my bike courier job. And I'm laying in bed. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go out into the world. Like, I didn't want to have to do the job. I didn't want to face the elements. And then you have this weird realization, right? Where you force yourself to get up and you overcome this anxiety. And then once you got out into the world, you're like, oh, this is great. I'm riding a bike. I had the coffee on the handlebars. I'm doing a front wheel wheelie. I'm doing all those things, right? Talking to my friends, delivering packages, exercising, feeling like a beast in the frozen rain. Suddenly it was all gone, right? But the point of it is civilization is the cause of our anxiety, right? And this was what Freud writes in his Civilization and its Discontents. So I want to frame that with Dick, because in the opening we talked a little bit not only is Dick this visionary writer who's wrestling with all of these topics from his exegesis, but he's also a political activist type of a writer, because he has many of his works. Think of a lot of what resonates with popular normie viewers in the film adaptations of Dick's works are this exact story of wrestling with anxiety. So and I think that it's let's kind of frame it we'll kind of go into it from an anxiety point of view first. Let's keep going down the anxiety row. So let's take this same concept from Freud's civilization and discontents, and let's ground. And we have this another kind of mystic madman would be Schreber, right? Another one who's a person who has a medical issue, and maybe Dix was medical also. There's lots of indications of this, and I'm not commenting on that per se, just commenting more on the work of the exegesis and how it fueled Dick's imagination in his writing. Some of that fuel is back to anxiety again, right? So that same existential dread, that same civilization, its discontent, the same Gnostic dread. It's a long tradition, maybe it's back to civilization's discontent. But what is that anxiety, right? Well, Freud speaks of anxiety in a great way, where he talks about what are the things, what is anxiety like, and he goes into. I remember there was a passage that's about, okay, when we're hungry, let's talk about bodily things. Something is affecting our body, right? When we're hungry, your stomach is rumbling, and your body starts to send you like the ghrelin in your body's produced, right? And then what you do when you're hungry is your body starts sending signals to you to get food. And the cure for hunger is eating, right? When you are fed, you no longer feel that feeling of hunger. So that kind of bodily reaction, that stimulus from the body of hunger, is solved by food. Hunger solved by food, right? When you want sex, for example, same thing. The having of sex removes the desire for it, right? Once you have that, then you're full. You want ice cream. You have ice cream. You don't want ice cream anymore, right? So hunger is food. Arousal satisfied by having sex. And then we get to, even something like, say, when you have a fear reaction, something where you have a panic attack, you can be, taking away the thing of fear. Safety can remove you from fear. So there's a lot of these. There's a one-to-one correspondence. The symptom is an effect. Hunger comes up and food removes it. But anxiety is a very strange one, because what is if anxiety is like a hunger, right? Your body's having an anxious moment. Well, what's the food to take away the anxiety, right? And I think this is, one has to know that one's hungry, right? And usually that's the rumbling in one's stomach, or the weak feeling, or you don't have energy, or you have the low blood sugar in the afternoon, crankiness, or whatever that is, right? But with anxiety, it's very strange, because you don't know what it is, what the itch is, right? And I think it's not the first. Dick is not the first person to wrestle with these. I mean, we brought up Schreber as an extreme example. But, if we look at, like I mentioned before, Lacan's Synthome was talking about Joyce. So the idea of James Joyce, he took his mad exegesis of, a merging of, we're thinking literary again, where there's a work, there's no madness. He took the idea of the Odyssey and mapped it to an everyday life with all of the conscious and unconscious chatter inside the mind, and kind of mapped it to this huge epic voyage, just kind of going out to the shop for the day, stopping at the pub kind of thing. All that became an epic voyage, And then Finnegan's Wake, even more so, it takes like the whole, it almost echoes the whole, it's almost a Gnostic work too, that it echoes the whole biblical creation to Revelation, and maps it to a night, a long night, and all of the strange language that emerges. So Lacan explores this as a way to do something with madness, right? We have these mad thoughts. Schreber had his rays. Joyce had his literary genius and his madness, and he channeled it into work. And here we have Dick channeling his work. There are sections of exegesis that it looked like they were just turned into the Timothy Archer and Valis. Is like whole sections of this almost made its way right into his creative writing. So it's almost like he was constantly writing, in a sense that he was also becoming the text in a way, right? So, and again, we were saying that this is not the first person. I mean, I think that in a way, the analogy can go to Baudelaire, right? Baudelaire, another discontent and anxious in the world, and yet finding a way to it. Or even Beckett, right? We talked about Joyce. Beckett's work doesn't have that charm that Dick's work has, maybe, but it does have funny moments. I mean, it's great. If you know Samuel Beckett, people love Samuel Beckett. So I think that where we're going with this is like the reaction to the anxiety is to give it some kind of voice, and then finally, maybe we'll wrap this up with the, so Dick's urge to explore these concepts. There's also this kind of notion of, he found the automatic writing of it all, like almost like an Edgar Cayce thing, where he predicted something. He was finding that by writing, he could shape the reality, right? I mean, in a lot of the same ways that that they flow the tears of the flesh android, just by measuring the flesh android's tear salinity, they could keep those tentacles firmly attached to his spine, and the tear flow lets the alien handlers continue the viability of the candidate, right? So I think with Dick's case, he's not the only one who's turned some madness into writing. We see that with Beckett, we see that with Baudelaire. But maybe I want to end up with this theory of religion and the accursed share by George Bataille. Just, I want to end on this one. And listen, we'll keep going through on exegesis of Dick. I think I just wanted to sort of frame it in some of these broader topics. But let's, in future podcasts, I will kind of dig deep. I have a couple examples that I really want to go into, and I think you guys are going to really like them. But to wrap up with this theory of religion idea, there's two concepts I want to talk about from this Bataille that relate to Dick. One is this theory of religion. There's a small quote in this that says, "The animal is in the world, like water is in water." And I think that there's this idea of Dick, his vision, the world, and the writing. And it sort of forms this pyramid and this focal point. He talks about that beam of logic, where in some ways he is trying to turn the text into the reality, right? One of the, we see this in the Stigmata, or in Palmer Eldritch, we kind of see some of this. But in exegesis, he's very good at slipping in things, right? Where, like, even in Martian Time Slip or in Ubik, where he starts pulling the carpet out from under you. He starts pulling the world out from under you. His own world he starts to pull out. And he just does it with some few words. Sometimes it's threadbare plot. Sometimes it's oddly clothed characters just jumbled together. He just seemed like he was writing this stuff full stream consciousness almost. And then there's this expert, pulling the rug out from under the eyes, pulls the rug out from under us, right? And suddenly we have, I think the great example for me was in Valis, where he's talking about, horse lover Fats is a renaming of himself. His name is Phillip K. Dick, and Phillip means horse lover, and Dick called it the Fats, right? he called Dick Fats. So he has this analogous character that he places into the world of Valis called Horse Lover Fats. And there's this one part where you start realizing when he's describing what Horse Lover Fats would do. So like say, for example, Horse Lover Fats, kind of like in a weird, almost lifted a bit by the Fight Club, where you have the characters off at the different clinics, right? They're fighting over the different nights that they're going to go to. The one's got testicular cancer, one's going to another clinic, and they're basically glomming off of the experience of being part of the group to fill their empty lives, right? And in an odd way, there's passages in Valis that predate that, where in Valis they're talking about someone dying of cancer, they're talking about some ex-girlfriends, some kind of human interactions that Horse Lover Fats is having interactions with. And there's one passage where, and I'll just try to paraphrase it, I don't have the quote here from it, but they're talking about, Horse Lover Fats would often think about her, and he would think about when she was dying of cancer. Horse Lover Fats was thinking about, was he doing this for himself, or was he actually being altruistic? And Horse Lover Fats, and so Dick keeps saying Horse Lover Fats would do this, and Horse Lover Fats would do this. And he'll say, and Horse Lover Fats would call into question what it meant for him to have human relationships. And when I have human relationships, I mean when Horse Lover Fats has human relationships, right? So suddenly he does this weird thing. Dick's writing does this weird thing where you realize it's an untrustworthy narrator, right? You realize the world building is untrustworthy. You realize that even the person talking to you, you've listened to his voice for a while. You've heard the rhythm. When he keeps saying in Valis, the empire never ended. It's just got a rhythm to it where you're expecting, another anecdote about Horse Lover Fats. Then this other subtext. So is Horse Lover Fats the author, or is he a different person? And then it goes right back to the empire never ended. And it starts to build this cadence where Dick turns the reading experience and the writing experience into a something that's summarized by Bataille's theory of religion as the world is in the world like water is in water. He starts to break away, that Gnostic realization that he's had through the exegesis. How do I show my reader this gap? How do I show this gap, the layer, the strata of reality? And finally, we have the last Bataille note here, just the idea of the circulation of energy on the earth. He's talking about, in this beginning chapter, the idea of sacrifice, so the Aztec worldview. So in this, he talks about Aztecs sacrificing things seemed very strange. It's like, why would they sacrifice? And then they became addicted to the sacrificing, right? And I think what's interesting about this accursed share point is, at first the sacrifice in Aztec culture was about gaining more crops, right? So we want to have a good crop year. Maybe they would sacrifice, an animal at first, right? So we're sacrificing an animal, and then it worked. So we said, well, hey, what if we sacrifice a person? And that works, right? And suddenly there's so much food that now the sacrificing starts to be, well, hey, if we got so much food, what if we sacrifice 10 of the most beautiful humans? Like the 10 most beautiful virgins we'll sacrifice. And now suddenly a modality change is happening where we're no longer fueled by necessity, right? So where does this lead? So this Aztec sacrifice, this idea of starts to become what Bataille calls out, once we have too many resources, the only thing to do with it is to waste it, right? And this is a very strange, counterintuitive concept, but the idea of it is, this is why wars happen, right? So Bataille kind of talks about war as it's a cursed share. It's like the idea of there's so much excess that we then destroy it. And now, so we go into these boom-bust cycles, right? Where the world consumes itself and then the world comes out of itself. And I kind of bring this up here to offer a different example, because I think that that's an anxiety, and I think that fits in with civilization and its discontents, and I think that that is opposite to what art does. And I think here we have Lacan talking about the synthome, which is Joyce and the creation of the work. We have Foucault's where there's work, there is no madness. What Dick's exegesis can kind of represent politically is the idea that, hey, if we create more art, if we can shunt that negativity into this sort of a creation, suddenly you start seeing that there's a new hope, there's more information, there's a beam of light, that something gets going into this. And I really want to continue this conversation with you guys in the next in the rest of this series. So I think that's going to call it for today. Let's please, guys, appreciate you listening this far. If you've made it, like or subscribe, share this with people. Would love to grow this channel, turn it into a live chat. Come back for more exegesis. If you've got a topic or a question you want to ask, please leave that in the comments. I'd be happy to answer it. Hey, before Camilla Christmas, get your copy of Flowing the Tears of the Flesh Android. It is a curiously short occupancy. I mean, the salinity of the tears cannot last forever. I'll do some readings of the Flesh Android. Maybe give you some insights into what's been redacted in some cases. It says declining substance, impartial, crying android. Tell you what Lumic is up to up in the COG satellite, and that would really support the channel. Also, we have Patreon. Would love to continue the conversation in our Patreon. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later. Let's continue the conversation in the comments, in our Patreon, and in the next podcast. If you ring the bell, you'll get the notification, but I try to do these weekly, and I also do some book reviews and book readings elsewhere on this channel. So looking forward to talking with you guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.